Good afternoon, and welcome to the Introduction to Social Analysis in Action, a care approach to gender transformation webinar. We're very excited to have so many of you join today. We'll hear from Elisabeth Cowan, Global Gender Cohort Coordinator at CARE USA, who will give us an overview of one of CARE's models for gender transformation, the social analysis in action, and how it can be integrated into projects that want to increase gender equality. Thank you, Elisabeth, for coming in and providing us with this learning opportunity. I'll just briefly go through some webinar housekeeping and then hand over to Elisabeth. The webinar will take around 20 to 30 minutes, followed by Q&A. Elisabeth will be answering questions at the end of the presentation, but please feel free to ask any questions throughout by typing them into the chat box. If you can't hear us anymore or have any technical issues, please let us know through the chat. The webinar will be recorded and posted on ACFID's YouTube channel in a few days. The slides will also be emailed to participants. Finally, please stay online at the end of the webinar to complete a very short survey. Before we start, could anyone please type into the chat box that they can hear me all right? Great, thank you. I'll now hand to Elisabeth.
Thanks so much, Anna. Hey everyone, it's really great to see so many names on the line there. My name's Elisabeth Cowan. I currently work for CARE USA. But a little bit about myself. I'm a gender specialist who has been working with CARE for around 6 years. Most of this time was actually in the CARE Australia world, working in different roles and different country offices with CARE Australia in the Asia region. I'm currently working for CARE USA in a role called Global Gender Cohort Coordinator. So basically that means that I'm coordinating a global network of gender specialists. But before I started this new role, I spent a lot of time working on social analysis in action, which, as you just heard, is one of CARE's key approaches for gender transformation. And I'm very excited to share with you more about SAAY during this webinar, and in particular sharing with you our new global implementation manual, which provides guidance for those of you who might be interested in using our approach in your own projects. So I'll start off by giving you a very brief overview of what social analysis in action, or SAAY, actually is. Firstly, we've used the term gender transformation a few times. So for those of you who might not be so familiar with gender terminology, gender transformation basically is a type of programming that aims to identify, challenge, and change harmful gender norms. So it is different from, say, gender mainstreaming, in that when we do gender transformative programming, we're actively trying to change those types of gender roles or gender relations which are harmful. So common gender norms that we try to change might be inequality in decision-making between women and men, unequal burdens of labor between women and men, that kind of thing. So social analysis in action is one approach that CARE uses to affect these types of changes. We've been using social analysis in action in CARE for around 15 years, and we use it across the globe in a variety of sectoral programming. So what is it? Social analysis in action is, as you can see there, a facilitated process through which individuals and communities explore and challenge the social norms and practices that shape their lives. Our goal is to catalyze a community-owned change process. So it's a very participatory process, which is ideally driven by the community. You can see the SAAY process diagram there, the circle diagram, which has 5 key steps. The first one is transforming staff capacity, which is something that I'll speak about a lot more. The second is reflecting with the community. With social analysis in action, this often takes the form of a participatory gender analysis. Step 3 is planning for action. This is done jointly and even led by the participants in the projects that we are implementing. Implementing those plans that they develop is the next step, and evaluation is the final step. What sets this apart from your usual project cycle is the transformation of staff capacity and also that outer ring of reflection, challenging, exploring, and learning, which is ongoing throughout the whole social analysis and action cycle. So there's a few things that are unique in terms of SAA. Specifically, and most importantly, is the fact that transforming staff capacity is at the center. So we're starting with ourselves. It's centered around ongoing critical reflection and dialogue. What we mean by this is having discussions between ourselves, with our project participants, and between project participants to gain a deeper understanding of complex and sensitive norms. It builds trust and creates safe spaces, which requires skilled facilitation. We work with our communities, and ideally they are the ones leading the change. And it's very effective for identifying and reaching the most marginalized, given that it's so participatory. I won't spend much time on this, but just to flag that there is a theory of change behind social analysis and action. The ultimate goal that you can see there, it's a little bit fuzzy, is the improved well-being of women and girls through advancement of equitable gender, social, and power norms. You can see that this goal is focusing on women and girls. CARE is an organisation that puts women and girls at the centre of our work. However, to achieve this goal, it is crucial that social analysis and action is implemented with women and men. So engaging men is extremely important. And our experience has found that men also benefit through this type of gender transformative programming. Underneath the theory of change, at the bottom layer, our four pillars of staff transformation, reflecting with communities, planning for action, and implementing those plans, feeds into our staff becoming active champions of gender equality, which then goes on to support community members' consciousness and motivation, which increases to change unequal gender and power norms. This leads into increased self-efficacy amongst our project participants and increased community activism to make and maintain positive changes in social and gender norms. These changes then lead into the next layer, which are increased agency, improved relations, and transformed structures, which are the three pillars of CARE's gender equality framework. And we know from years and years of programming, as well as around 5 years of research spanning about 30 countries, that in order to achieve gender equality, change must happen in those three areas of increased agency, improved relations, and transformed structures. So this is to give you an idea of what SAA looks like in practice. And basically it looks like a lot of fun with a lot of participatory activities and games that are facilitated with both our staff and also the community members that we work with. So this is just a taster of a few of the common tools that we use. They include things like body mapping for talking about sex and sexuality, a very effective tool which some of you might be familiar with called Genderbox, which is very effective for exploring gender norms, how we're affected by them, when we conform and when we don't. Pile sorting, which is an extremely simple tool, which is great for exploring the gender division of labour or gender decision making. And another really great social analysis and action approach is simple community events, which in a really public and visible way challenge gender norms and demonstrate to participants that things can be different. So the picture there in the bottom right corner of your screen is a community event from Vietnam where we facilitated men to do a baby bathing competition, showing that men too can do what is often referred to as women's work. So some of you might be looking at these pictures and going, this is no different from participatory learning and action activities. So I'll just spend a little time to explain what actually makes SAA unique. Because you're right, we do use a lot of tools that we have borrowed from others, and a lot of them are really common PLA tools, which are very effective. However, what makes SAA different is that we also use these tools with ourselves as development practitioners. So instead of looking externally and seeing the participants in our projects as the people that need to change, we recognize that we too are affected by gender norms in the same way that our project participants are. And that we as development practitioners also need to go through a process of transformation if we are to effectively facilitate gender transformation in the communities that we work with. We know this to be true. If we ourselves do not embody and fully commit to the values of gender equality, we lack credibility in implementing our projects, and the outcomes are simply not as effective. So the first and probably most important component of staff transformation is enabling our staff to recognize how they're affected by gender norms and increasing their commitment to gender equality and gender transformative programming. Another very important component of it is building facilitation skills. So these types of participatory activities, and in particular, facilitating discussions about issues that are often quite sensitive, things like, our beliefs and our values about what women and men should do, discussing very sensitive issues in some contexts, such as homosexuality or things like sex work. Being able to facilitate these discussions effectively and sensitively and doing no harm requires very strong facilitation skills. So another part of staff transformation is building those facilitation skills in our staff. Importantly, this capacity building, this staff transformation cannot be a one-off. So these pictures on your screen are from our application of social analysis and action with care in Vietnam. On the left, you can see photos from an initial intensive 4-day social analysis and action workshop. So here staff are learning about the approach and practicing their facilitation skills through using the tools. However, on the right is just one photo from one of our regular ongoing monthly SAA dialogues. So once a month on the last Friday of every month, care staff in Vietnam stop working at 4 p.m. They come together and they have a discussion about a gender issue which are agreed on and identified by the staff. And different teams take turns to facilitate these discussions using participatory activities like those that we use in our projects. The fact that this is ongoing is extremely important. It keeps gender at the forefront of staff members' minds. It gives them ongoing opportunities to practice facilitation. And it's also really great for team building and morale building among the staff because these activities are fun. And I'm very excited to share that the biggest SAA champion now in Care Vietnam is not one of our gender programming staff, but is actually the IT guy who has become extremely passionate about the approach and is leading the monthly reflections, showing that it is possible to get buy-in from a diversity of staff through approaches such as this. So now is my pitch to convince you all that you would like to use social analysis and action. I'm going to do this by sharing some exciting evidence from some care projects that have applied SAA. Before I go into sharing some of this great data, I'll just clarify that SAA is an approach. So it's not a project. It's not a standalone tool. So SAA is effective when it is integrated into other sectoral projects. So the evidence that I'll share with you now are from a few different types of programming. You'll see that a lot of it is from sexual and reproductive and health programming, which is the sector that SAA was born from. But it's now being used in different sectoral programming by CARE across the world. So the first example I would like to share is a project called Towards Improved Economic and Sexual and Reproductive Health Outcomes for Adolescent Girls in Ethiopia. This project identified the two most important norms which were holding back young married girls from using good sexual reproductive and health practices. And these norms were also limiting their economic empowerment. So the two norms identified were, firstly, that every decision should be made by a man, and secondly, that women should stay home and serve the family. So the project team identified that if they proactively tried to challenge and change these two harmful norms, girls could have increased access to sexual and reproductive health and also increased economic empowerment. The team used two key interventions to challenge these social norms. So the first one was working directly with married girls and those who were vulnerable to early marriage. And they used group-based peer education, which was implemented in village savings and loans associations, so savings and loans groups. And they also integrated discussions and education on sexual reproductive health, gender and power. And the second key intervention used was working with community members, so working with those people who are most influential in girls' lives, including their parents and other community leaders, and using social analysis and action tools with this group of key influencers. So you can see that there were extremely impressive shifts in social norms on ever married girls' mobility, their household roles, their decision-making on family planning and finances. So family planning use increased by 12.7%. And there were two different cohorts. So there was one cohort of girls that went through the project from 2015, and the second one came a bit later in 2016. For those starting off in 2015, they perceived more support from their husbands and mothers-in-law to use family planning to increase by 73% and by 22% for the second cohort, who had only been participating in the project for about a year by the time the evaluation was done. I think this is very exciting. Young girls, married girls' ability to leave the house without permission also increased by more than 95%. And there was a 2-time increase in girls who owned and controlled their personal savings. So these changes are significant, especially given the very strong traditional gender norms that existed in the communities that the project was working in. And what I would like to emphasize is that, we often hear people saying, yeah, sure, it's important to change gender norms, but this takes time. It's slow. This evidence actually shows that change can happen fast when we implement effective interventions. So these changes happened in just 2.5 years, showing that when we deliberately try to challenge harmful gender norms, change can actually happen quite fast. The second example is from Vietnam, our ethnic minority women's empowerment project. So this was a very different type of programming. This was a rural development project. It also used village savings and loans associations, which were the platform in which social analysis and action activities were implemented with women group members and also their husbands. And what I would like to show you here, SAA was used as one intervention among others in the project, but SAA dialogues were the key intervention challenging gender norms. So what we can see here is that over the life of the project, again, it was a relatively short 3-year implementation period. There was a significant increase in joint decision making between husbands and wives. So you can see there that from the baseline to the end line, joint decision making between husbands and wives increased, and husbands' independent decision making fell quite significantly. Women's sole decision making also fell, but that corresponds with the increase in joint decision making, which is really what we're aiming for. We're looking for a situation in which women and men are able to have a discussion and decide in a constructive way together. Their perceptions around who should be involved in economic decision making also changed, with an increase in project participants, this is women and men, who agreed that both husbands and wives should be involved in decision making. And then just a few more examples to share briefly. These are mainly going back to sexual reproductive health programming. In another project in Ethiopia, we saw a project where girls had significant improvements in their financial skills, savings, and sexual reproductive health compared with the control group. There were also improvements in couple communication, decreased gender-based violence, and improved mental health. Girls felt more optimistic about their future, and there were other positive changes in social support, gender attitudes, and satisfaction in their marriage. And these were mainly brought about by the fact that we were bringing couples together to participate in SAAY dialogues as a couple. The next example from Kenya showed a significant increase in family planning use from 34% at the baseline to 51% at the end line. And what I would like to stress here is that this project did not provide any contraceptive. So there were no clinical interventions. The main intervention here was social analysis and action dialogues. So even without providing sexual reproductive health services specifically, family planning use increased. And again, we saw better quality communication between couples. And those findings were actually published in a peer-reviewed article, so they're pretty solid findings there. And then finally, another one in Rwanda. SAA dialogues enabled men and women to understand that women are not the ones who have any say over the sex of the unborn child, and that was a very sticky or strongly held social norm. Once that was challenged effectively, there was an increased use of family planning. There was also more evening out of joint decision making between couples and more contribution from men to household activities, including childcare. We also saw a bit of a reduction in gender-based violence. And then just to finish with the evidence sharing components, some qualitative findings here going back to Vietnam, the same project as before, where we spoke with one couple during the evaluation who explained that Ang, the husband, said that previously I did not understand gender equality. According to traditions, women should do all the household work, but men can share these chores. So he now recognizes that men can do this work too. And his wife validated what he was saying. Before he asked our daughter to do something for him, like washing the dishes. Now my husband asks our boy to do housework as well. So there's a hint here that these positive changes may also be flowing onto the next generation, which is really exciting. So hopefully I have now successfully convinced you all that social analysis and action is an effective approach for affecting gender transformation through our development projects. And maybe you're interested in seeing how you can use it yourself in your own projects. So I would like to introduce to you our brand new Social Analysis and Action Global Implementation Manual. As I mentioned earlier, CARE developed SAA in the context of sexual and reproductive and health programming, mainly in Africa. But over the years, we came to realize that it's actually extremely adaptable and can be used in a variety of different sectoral programming. And so CARE started using it in our projects such as women's economic empowerment or food nutrition, and food security programming, education projects. It's even been adapted for some humanitarian responses. So we developed this manual as a way to provide additional support to implementers and project designers who might want to use SAA in different sector contexts. Our first manual was focused only on sexual reproductive health, and this one is expanded to include the 4 sectors of CARE's 2020 program strategy, which are sexual reproductive health and rights, women's economic empowerment, food, nutrition and security, and a life free from violence, or GBV. So this manual, it provides more information on social analysis and action, how to use the approach, and more detailed guidance on the different steps in the process and what they look like. The most exciting part of the manual potentially are the tools, and I'll tell you a bit more about that shortly. But we're also really proud of the fact that for this manual we have spent a lot more time to provide in-depth guidance on monitoring, evaluation and learning for social analysis and action, which is actually extremely relevant for other types of gender programming as well. So even those of you who are working on M&E but maybe not going to use SAA might still be interested in that. The manual is publicly available, so we want SAA to be used far and wide. We think that this approach works, and we would love to see more of our peers using it as well for our shared goal of promoting gender equality across the world. The manual has been designed to be accessible, so we've kept it, we've tried to keep to plain language, we've kept it as brief as possible. So, hopefully it can be accessible for everyone from field officers to project designers. It can also be used for those of you who might be looking for resources to build staff gender capacity. So a lot of the tools can be used for staff training. And the MEL framework that we have staff training, and the MEL framework that we have designed is also really useful for monitoring and evaluation and learning staff, project managers and project designers. I'm going to now tell you a little bit more about the manual, but in particular focusing on the tools, the M&E guidance, and just sharing with you the annexes. So onto the tools. Chapter 3 of the manual provides instruction on how to use those participatory SAA tools that CARE uses most commonly and that we found to be most useful and most adaptable. As I said earlier, some of these tools were developed by CARE, but many of them are borrowed from our peers, and we give credit to those in the manual itself. So each tool, here you can see an example of the gender box tool. It contains instructions on how to use the tool. But I think what we're most proud of is that we have provided a further set of instruction on how you can use this tool for different steps in the SAA process. For example, transforming staff capacity, reflecting with communities, and planning for action, which is what you can see in that image there. Finally, we've also provided guidance for how you can adapt this tool to use in different sectors. Like I said, these sectors mirror the CARE 2020 program strategy sectoral areas, but the tools are very adaptable. So I would encourage you to have a look and think about how you can adapt these tools for use in your sector, even if it doesn't fall into what's presented in the manual. But for those of you whose work does align with those focus areas of CARES, I think that you'll find this additional guidance really useful. So if for this tool, for example, for gender box, there's additional guidance there for how you could adapt it for a sexual and reproductive health and rights project, or a women's economic empowerment project, or a food and nutrition security project. And also how you could use it if you were working to address gender-based violence. the idea is that practitioners should be able to pick up this manual and pretty much go ahead and implement it without having to do too much sectoral adaptation themselves. The other part of the manual, which I would like to tell you a little bit more about, is the monitoring, evaluation, and learning section. Like I said, we've designed this for use in SAA because a lot of our colleagues were begging for more guidance on how to do M&E for SAA projects. But a lot of this is very relevant for other types of gender programming. So even if you don't go on to use SAA, you might still find this useful. So the M&E section provides guidance on what to monitor and evaluate in projects using SAA and how to go about doing this. And this guidance responds to each step of the SAA process. It also provides a range of suggested data collection tools and approaches that can be used. And a lot of those that we've included in the manual are again borrowing from our peers. So we've avoided inventing new things where possible, given that there's so much genius already out there in the sector. The manual also provides some suggested indicators. And for those of you working on design or working on M&E, I know that we often spend a lot of time running around seeking indicators for use in our projects. So some of these might be useful for you. The indicators are disaggregated by CARE's domains of our gender equality framework, agency relations and structures, but also by key areas of domains of change that we aim to see in gender analyses or sectors. That final image there shows you some of the indicators that we're suggesting for the different steps of the SAA process, and also some potential sources for those. So it's telling you how you can collect the data to measure those indicators. Okay, the last component of the manual, which I'll share with you today, are the annexes. So we have, in Annex 1, we have collected a range of case studies from CARE's experience applying SAA, and there's one case study per step of the SAA process. So we recognize that some people might be a bit confused about how to use this in their project, so hopefully those case studies can provide some ideas. The second annex provides alternative and additional tools. Obviously, if you're implementing a 3-year project and the manual is only providing 11 tools, you might run out of tools. So here we've listed a whole bunch more that you might want to look at using in your projects. And we've also, in Annex 3, provided a long list of additional resources. So for those of you doing gender programming or even sector programming that wants to be more gender sensitive, this can be useful as a bit of a one-stop shop. So we've got different resources for different sectors, and also different resources for different types of gender or steps in gender work, I suppose. So different tools for conducting gender analysis, doing no harm, monitoring and evaluation, etc. And I'd just like to flag also that those resources are not all CARE resources. Again, we're very respectful and appreciative of the amazing gender work that our peers are doing in the development sector across the world. And so we've tried to draw on those approaches that we have found really useful implementing within CARE. So I encourage you to look at those as well. Okay, so I think that's enough talking from me. Hopefully that has given you a bit of an overview of our social analysis and action approach, maybe inspired you to have a go using it or something like it in your projects, and also given you an insight into our new manual, which is a resource that you can use to do this. So I will leave it there for now, but I would love to take any questions that you might have, or comments or feedback about our approach or anything else gender really that you might like to raise at the moment. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. And I can see, Anne, you've said that it will be very helpful in our GBV projects in Papua New Guinea, which is awesome to hear. So CARE in Papua New Guinea is using very similar tools in their projects. In particular, they've developed something called the Family Business Training Manual, which they're using in a coffee project in the Highlands. And it uses similar tools to this one. So these are very adaptable and can be used in different contexts. And yeah, I'd be interested if you had any other thoughts on any adaptation you might need to do, or any other thoughts about how you would use it in PNG. Okay, Megan has asked, is the manual equally applicable for agency staff as well as the field, or do you recommend different approaches for different staff? We use this approach in head offices, we use it in the field, we use it with implementing partners. So the beauty of SAA is that it is really adaptable. And I think one of the core principles really is that it's trying to break down these divides. So it's trying to move away from a way of working where we see Liz in CARE USA as being separate from my colleagues in, I don't know, CARE Madagascar, and them being separate from the participants in our projects. So with SAA, we see us all as being, I guess, one massive community that is working together simultaneously through a process of gender transformation. So CARE Australia is also doing regular social analysis and action discussions with staff in the head office here in Canberra. Just like their country office, CARE Vietnam, is doing it in Vietnam. And then these similar, very, very similar discussions are happening among project participants through the projects that we're working with. So I guess in short, this is something that can be used with all staff and project participants. But you might want to think about, different probing questions to ask with the tools, maybe some different ways of delivery, and some of those hints are provided in the manual itself. Okay, so I was asking, where can you get a copy of the manual, Elisabeth? It's available online. So I think when we send the WebEx, we can also accompany that with a link to where you can find the manual and the accompanying monitoring and evaluation guidance. But in the meantime, you can also just do a Google CARE Social Analysis and Action Global Implementation Manual, and you can find it. And you said that you're focusing on increasing people's financial status. And I guess, through this approach, what we're trying to do is address the root causes, the gender-based root causes that are behind poverty and social injustice. So for something like increasing financial capacity, while this isn't going to give people financial literacy training, for example, you could implement SAA activities alongside financial literacy training, looking at barriers like the fact that men are dominant in decision making. Try to challenge that social norm, and then you're fostering a more enabling environment, which can contribute to your overall goal. What else do we have here? Sorry, thanks for all the comments, just working through. And you've also talked about capacity building exercises. And yes, these can be used for capacity building. Natasha, you've asked, do you have a favorite tool or exercise to use with VSLAs during regular field monitoring trips? That's a really great question. One tool well, there are some tools that lend themselves better to monitoring compared with others. I mentioned pile sorting briefly, and I have used that for project monitoring with VSLA groups when I was working with CARE in Vietnam. And that worked really well as a way to identify any changes in household decision-making, household division of labor, You can ask them, get them to do the exercise and then ask, has this changed since you've been participating in the project? If so, why? If so, how? There's another tool in the manual called Vote with Your Feet, which is really great for surfacing beliefs about gender norms, and it's an easy tool to facilitate that you might also want to look at. Angeline, you've asked me to talk more to the research results. Most of the projects that were that I referred to, I have not worked on directly, so I'm not the best person to speak to about research results. However, some of those findings are available publicly. So for example, the example from Kenya is available online, and there's also some other learning briefs that CARE has prepared with other evidence. So again, if we can send my email address with the WebEx recording and you want to get in touch with me, I can put you in touch with more of that evidence. Okay. Elisabeth M., you've asked, how do you draw on cultural beliefs and understandings of gender? So the tools that we're using are participatory, which means that they are extremely adaptable. With SAA, we avoid giving messages. We're not going into a community and telling people husbands and wives need to share, men should not be violent towards their partners, girls and boys must both go to school. We're not giving messages. The tools that we are using in SAA are all about facilitating critical reflection and dialogue. So we're asking questions. This enables the participants to share and surface their own cultural beliefs and understandings of gender, and then explore together how these impact on their lives. Ultimately, it's up to them if they choose to change or not. So it's all about enabling people to see how things are playing out in their community and identifying what they might want to change. This is really powerful. So sometimes, just recently during an analysis in Papua New Guinea, I used the pile sorting tool to explore decision making within the household. And we have women saying, we never realized that it was like this before. We just accepted this as normal, but now we know this is not fair. We have rights and things need to change. So it's all about providing space for people to come to these conclusions themselves, as opposed to us as outsiders coming in and telling them what to do. And you're talking about religion there. Honestly, I haven't applied these in very, strongly religious contexts before, but again, I think using that same approach of coming in and asking questions and using these tools in a sensitive way is a way that you could surface and discuss some of these issues. Some tools tackle more sensitive issues more head-on, and others can do this in a less confrontational way. So what I usually recommend is starting off with some of the less sensitive norms. So things like household division of labor is usually one that's not so sensitive to talk about. And then over time, as you gain trust with the communities, then building up to talking about some of these more sensitive issues, which might include religion and things like family planning. Tom at Plan Australia, you're asking for experience or examples with SAA in WASH programming. I am not aware of any specifically being implemented in WASH programming yet. However, hopefully over the next 4 years, I don't know if, Tom, you're going to be involved in any Water for Women funded programs. CARE Australia is partnering with World Vision on some Water for Women projects, and we are recommending that SAA be used as part of that programming. So I hope that over the next 4 years, we will have a wealth of experience or examples for using SAA in WASH programming. And if you would like to also use a similar approach, please let me know, because I think it would be great to have multiple agencies using these approaches so that we can share our experience. Natasha, you're talking about addressing alcoholism. I don't know. I can't think of any tools specifically because I haven't used it to address that particular issue before. But like I said, these tools are very adaptable. So I'm sure if you take a creative approach, you could use some of these tools to address alcoholism. There's some other tools in the manual for like root cause analysis tools, which you could potentially use to explore alcoholism. There's one there called But Why, which I really like. That could maybe work. But I think also, using kind of almost any of the tools, but building in questions specifically targeting alcoholism could work. Teresa, you've asked if you have time for one more question. Yes, we still have time. Do you find the experience of norms relating to other marginal groups and identities are surfaced through SAA? Yes, absolutely. Great idea. So with one of the projects that CARE is partnering with World Vision on, we are also partnering with CBM. This is a Water for Women project. And so we have already started thinking about how we can address both gender and disability using SAA. Again, the tools remain the same, but the questions that you would ask associated with the tools will change. So for example, something like the Vote with Your Feet tool, which is about surfacing beliefs and assumptions, just simply adding in some statements around disability would be a very easy and effective way to explore disability. Similarly, activities like body mapping, where we're asking people to think about how women and men experience pleasure, pain, violence differently. You could have you could adjust that to also focus on women with a disability. CARE has used these tools to explore specific different types of intersectionalities, including sex work. We've done this with sex workers and also ethnic minority groups. So definitely adaptable. Great, loving the cross-learning already going on there between Megan and Anne. And I thank you so much for already finding the manual and sharing the link there. Super efficient. So I think we have a few more minutes if there's any final questions. Thanks for all the great questions so far. I've really enjoyed this. That's great, Teresa. Thank you. And if you do go and try a few things out and you have any questions, please do feel free to let me know. And also let me know how you go. And for those of you who are thinking about adapting these tools for addressing different issues like religion or alcoholism, or using them with different groups such as women with a disability, I would really love to hear what you do and how that works out as well. I'm just going to type my email address into the chat box here. Okay, I can't see anyone else typing. So if there's no more questions or comments, thank you so much for that. I really enjoyed that discussion. Yeah, like I said, feel free to let me know if you have any other questions or if you go forth and apply any of this. And I will hand back over to, no, I won't hand back over to anyone. I'll just end the discussion there. So thank you all so much and good luck affecting gender transformation in your own projects. Bye-bye.